and the plan today is to put my ST170 powered Mark 1 back together. This was £40 on eBay. With these sprung type ones, the springs end up falling out. With the unsprung ones, the spline ends up wearing. So I just decided to throw a cheap clutch in. I then added some more sealer and voila, you wouldn't even know. My grinder died. RIP. I haven't got any gearbox oil. Maude's exhaust fell off. There was a hole in the bottle before testing to see if the clutch actually worked, which it didn't. Oh dear. This clutch is broken and it's done 0 miles.
No comment.
Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes, and today you join me from the cockpit of my beautiful girlfriend Kat's Ford Focus that she likes to call Lenny. I'm heading over to my other garage where I store 2 out of the 3 old school Ford Escorts that I own, and the plan today is to put my favourite car, Esther, my ST170 powered Mark 1, back together. In the boot of Lenny, I've got the Mazda RX-8 6-speed gearbox and the starter motor that I recently picked up from my good friend Lee Booth, who saved the day yet again with some welding on those parts. And if you didn't see that video, definitely go and check it out, because we got a good look around Lee's latest project, which is a 100E that he's going to be putting a Zetec turbo lump into. Now, in terms of Esther's issues, I decided not to send the unsprung clutch friction plate back to Helix Motorsport to have the centre spline replaced, and I'll explain all about that whilst I'm doing the job today. I've basically decided to go down a different route, but yeah, I'm going to get myself to Esther's garage as quick as I can, get her out and get her jacked up, and dive straight into, hopefully, putting her back together today. Alright, well, annoyingly, as soon as I jacked Esther up, it started raining, but it has thankfully stopped now. Fingers crossed it stays dry for the rest of the day. Now, over here, I've got the RX-8 6-speed that Lee welded up for me. You can see he's welded it up there. One bit I forgot to tell him about was this hole round here. Originally, this had like it looked like a vent. I can't remember whether it was facing backwards or facing forwards, but I'm guessing if it was facing forwards, it was to let cold air into the bell housing, maybe for cooling. And if it was facing backwards, then maybe it's to let debris out of the bell housing. I don't know. But I shaved it off for clearance, and it just leaves a massive hole like this. And what I did to this gearbox when this was initially fitted, when I first did the RX-8 conversion, and you know, the same thing I did when I fitted this one, was just glue in some really thin alloy sheet. I've actually got a bit over here that I'm going to be gluing into this one. And yeah, Lee said to me, why didn't I tell him? And he could have welded that up at the same time. And so, yeah, I'm going to glue that on in a minute. What I'm also going to do is shave some more bits off of this gearbox. I basically shaved more off of this one when I fitted this one based on what I learned from fitting this one in terms of clearance. So I'm going to basically replicate what I did to that one to this one. It's mainly around this area. You can see that that one has had more shaved off. This fin over here, which I shaved a little bit off of this one, I ended up shaving off completely on that one. And then there's a bit around the other side as well. Yeah, this fin here, which will be that one there. So yeah, going to get the grinder out and replicate those modifications. As I say, need to fit the slave cylinder for that one onto this one. I've got the clutch arm here. Going to have to reuse this bearing because I forgot to order another one, and it does seem like it's got a bit of play, unfortunately. But let's face it, in about 1,000 miles, Esther's probably going to need another clutch, and it's a lot easier to do now. She's got a bigger gearbox tunnel anyway. So yeah, don't mind reusing that bearing, although I understand it's not ideal. Now, I've had a couple of people ask me in the past about the reverse light wiring on these RX-8 gearboxes, and the reverse light switch is the one round this side. So that's the driver's side of the gearbox. There is another electrical thing up here, but that's actually for the neutral cut-off. I'm not sure what it's called. So basically in the Mazda RX-8, you're only able to start the car when it's in neutral. So that's what that one's for, whereas this one allows continuity through that switch when the gearbox is in reverse. The way to test it is with your multimeter set to ohms. Basically, the 2 wires coming from this switch will only have continuity when you have the gearbox in reverse, and the wires coming from this switch will only have continuity when you've got the gearbox in neutral. So that's how you can tell which one's which. And basically, you need to connect one side of this switch to the wire that comes out of your loom on a Mk1 Escort, which would normally be connected to the reverse light switch on the Ford gearbox, and then the other wire needs to go to earth. So essentially, when you put it in reverse, you're sending that current to earth. So I always hook up like a double multi-plug like this, and then on the car I hook up the other side of that multi-plug, and then that brown wire there is the original reverse light wire from the loom, and then the black wire basically goes to the body, to earth. Now over here I've got the starter motor that Lee also welded up for me. This lug had basically broken off completely, and he gave me this Allen key bolt as well, just because the welds are in the way of using a hex bolt. So yeah, I'm going to bolt that on. I'm going to try and utilise the 3rd bolt hole this time. You know, I normally only bolt these on with 2 bolts, and I think that's probably what's caused it to break. So yeah, going to try and bolt it up with 3 bolts this time. And yeah, Lee's saved my starter, saved me loads of money. Over here is a very cheap clutch friction plate that I've decided to fit this time. This was £40 on eBay. And basically the idea behind this is that if I'm going to have to change the clutch every 1,000 miles, regardless of what clutch I'm fitting, I may as well just fit cheap ones. With these sprung type ones, the springs end up falling out. With the unsprung ones, the spline ends up wearing. So yeah, this time I just decided to throw a cheap clutch in. However, what I am thinking is, before I bolt the flywheel and stuff back onto Esther's engine and finally fit this gearbox, once I've done all the modifications to the gearbox, I'm actually going to trial fit it onto the engine, just because, you know, whilst I've got the gearbox off and whilst I'm refitting the gearbox, it gives me another opportunity just to have a look to see if there is anything wrong in terms of, you know, the alignment of the gearbox or whatever. I mean, I've tried 2 adapter plates from a company that apparently gets no issues from anyone else. However, when I was editing the video, when I took Esther apart, I noticed that when I took the last bell housing bolt out, you know, as I took that bolt out, the gearbox pulled away from the engine. So that kind of leads me to believe that possibly the bolt itself is sort of forcing the gearbox and the engine together, and that's not really the way it should be. You know, the engine and the gearbox should slide together and then the bolts hold it in. So maybe there's something that's, you know, making the gearbox not sit dead central, which could have caused the centre spline of the last clutch, and, you know, it's happened before, to wear out. So yeah, I just want to trial fit the gearbox, you know, without all the clutch and flywheel attached, as I say, just to see if I can see anything wrong. But before that, I need to get the grinder out and start modding this gearbox. I spent a little bit more time shaping the cover for the gearbox, and then I grabbed the Kent seam sealer to glue it to the bell housing. I then added some more sealer, and voila, you wouldn't even know. I added a bit of sealer on the inside of that plate, and then I fired up the generator to do the more noisy modifications to the Mazda box. A cutting disc would have been more suited to this bit, and I did eventually switch to one but forgot to push record, and then shortly after, my grinder died. RIP. I was able to finish off the cutting with a hammer and chisel, and then I smoothed off all the areas that I'd modified with the flap wheel on the drill. It was time to trial fit the Mazda box into Esther, which is an absolute mission on my own, but it seemed to mount up perfectly with the adapter plate. Happy days. With the box back out, it was time to transfer all the bits over from the other box. Firstly, the clutch arm and release bearing, making sure that the arm was correctly located on the pivot ball, and then I transferred over the slave cylinder, which is simply bolted to the bell housing with 2 bolts. With the Mazda 6-speed now ready to fit, it was time to fit the flywheel back onto Esther's engine, which will only go on one way, so I spun it to line up the bolt holes, then I applied Loctite to the threads of the bolts and put ARP lube under the heads. I gradually pulled the flywheel onto the crank using my gun, and then hooked up a bar to the front pulley and leant it against the chassis so that I could torque the flywheel bolts up. I used the Kent brake cleaner to give the flywheel a thorough clean before lifting on the clutch cover and the clutch, using an input shaft as an alignment tool, and then gradually tightened up the bolts. But then I noticed a problem. One of the clutch bolts was longer than the others, which meant that that part of the cover wasn't flush with the flywheel. So I took the bolt out, added a couple of washers, and then screwed it back in. I torqued up the clutch cover, pulled out the alignment tool, lifted the gearbox back into position, and done up all the bell housing bolts. Then I removed one of the studs from the old gearbox because the new gearbox had one missing, added some thread lock and screwed it into the new gearbox. And then once the gearbox mount was refitted, I could remove the jack from under the gearbox. Next to be refitted was the prop shaft, followed by the starter motor, and this time I was going to utilise all 3 mounting points. I added 2 nuts to this Allen key bolt to stop the threads fouling on the bell housing here, and then I wired up the starter motor and the reverse light switch on the gearbox. Alright, so I'm fast running out of light, but Esther is almost now back together. I still need to fit the shifter to the gearbox. The reason I haven't fitted that yet, because I haven't got any gearbox oil. That's another thing I forgot to get, along with the release bearing for the clutch and stuff. And I'm hoping that I'm able to fill the gearbox up through the shifter, because it's quite easy to get to the bolt you need to remove to fill the gearbox oil up underneath. But it's not very easy getting the oil in through that hole when the gearbox is in situ. I do have like a big syringe thing, but it always leaks. So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to fill it up through the shifter hole. So I'll fit the shifter after that. Yeah, the only thing I sort of found not right when I was putting Esther back together was that one clutch bolt that was longer than the others. And I never thought it was an issue before because the hole for those bolts goes all the way through to the back of the flywheel. But what I realised today is the bit of the clutch that bolt was, fastening up wasn't flush with the flywheel. So although that hole goes all the way through, it's obvious that the thread doesn't go all the way through. So I wonder if that could be potentially why she keeps eating clutches, if, that one sort of part of the cover isn't flat with the flywheel. I doubt it, to be honest, but it's something. We'll just have to see how long this clutch lasts. But yeah, this is a very cheap clutch, so hopefully it won't slip. And one thing I will be doing when I get this thing back on the road is adjusting my clutch pedal stop, which is on the back of the pedal there. I know it's very dark in here, because I want to adjust it so that I've only just got enough throw to engage the clutch. Because what I didn't mention earlier in this video, the reason I didn't send the unsprung clutch back to Helix Motorsport is because I found a slight crack in it where the centre spline is riveted onto it. So, the plate was bent basically, and that was something that one of you guys suggested in the comments. So what I think happened is maybe I had too much throw on that clutch plate, or it just got bent from wear, because they literally don't have any springs in them or anything. They literally, the plate bending is what engages the clutch, right? So when I recently added a bit of throw to the clutch, trying to see if I could stop the gearbox crunching, basically I think that there's now going to be too much throw on the clutch, and maybe the throw needs to be slightly different because I'm using a different friction plate as well. So essentially I'm going to make sure before I start driving this thing that I've only just got enough throw on the clutch, just in case having too much throw on the clutch could potentially make this clutch fall apart, because when the clutch fell apart in Northern Ireland, that was due to having too much throw on the clutch. So definitely going to be fine-tuning the pedal stop on Esther before I actually drive her. Yeah, other than all that, I've pretty much just got to plug the battery back in, and I've got to plug the clutch line back into the slave cylinder and bleed it. But yeah, she's near enough back together. I really am running out of light fast around here. I think I'm just going to quickly top up the oil while she's jacked up and level-ish, because I'm worried that I might forget to do that when I come back around here, because we obviously lost a little bit of oil when I took her apart whilst I was trying to bodge the sump gasket. fingers crossed that will now be leak free. So yeah, I'm going to quickly top the oil up and then pack up round here, and then I need to go and pick up my beautiful girlfriend from work. But I will be back round here in a couple of days when hopefully we'll be taking Esther for her first spin since we fitted the new clutch. I'm going to put that in this video, so I'll see you in a couple of seconds. Hello, into a new day, and we're now 2 days away from the big meet in Southend that I'd like to take Esther to. Today I made my way to the garage in Maude, my Maude Mark II, and something happened about 5 minutes before I got here that's going to change my plans over the next couple of days. My plans were to come back round here on Friday to give Esther a wash and maybe carry out the last couple of jobs to get her ready for the meet. There's convoys going from everywhere to this thing at Southend, so you know, I was going to go from around this area rather than going from the area that I live in. But on the way down here today, Maude's exhaust fell off. Now this exhaust is kind of hanging in there. We've got a 2¼ inch manifold, and I've got a 2-inch exhaust system that someone gave me in Northern Ireland, and then I've used like a reducer thing to make it work, and it's not welded, it's just, you know, clamped on. Well, it looks like the system has actually snapped, or is it yeah, I thought it had just come unslipped, but when I tried to sort of hook it back up at the side of the road, it's as if it's too short, so I'm guessing it's snapped right where that goes into the reducer. What I did so that I could, you know, drive the car, because it was scraping, because I was literally down the road, is I actually put my bonnet prop, I've threaded it into there and threaded it into there, so, you know, it keeps the exhaust off the ground. So, yeah, I need to get my bonnet prop back out at some point. But yeah, the car is now obviously ridiculously loud, so I don't think it's wise to take Maude home this evening. I think it's better to take Esther home with me this evening. And that's going to mean that I may as well just leave to go to the meet on Friday from home. You know, I can pick up one of the convoys from there, it's not an issue. But that also means that I've got to do everything that I want to Esther before I leave here today. I'm going to take my cleaning stuff with me because I can do that tomorrow or Friday morning. But yeah, everything else needs to be done so that I can drive Esther home this evening. Now, yesterday, my beautiful girlfriend picked me up what I think is the right gear oil for Esther's Mazda box from our friends at Halfords. And I was chatting to Jonathan Hughes last night through Facebook from RX8 Gearbox Adapters UK, who told me that he's not sure if you can fill the gearbox oil up through the shifter. So I'm gonna have to get underneath and do it the proper way, which is annoying. I've done it in the past with this big syringe thing I've got, which leaks down my arm. It's a nightmare, but it is what it is. So yeah, just need to fill the gearbox up with gearbox oil. Still need to plumb in and bleed the clutch slave cylinder. And then there's a couple of other jobs that I want to do on Esther, but let's get those two annoying jobs out of the way first. Right, so as far as I know, this Mazda box takes 1.75 litres of oil. And don't worry, I've got an axle stand underneath the anti-roll bar mount there. I removed the filler plug with the 24mm spanner and then started squeezing the gearbox oil in. But unfortunately, there was a hole in the bottle. So I poured what was left into the second bottle, squeezed what I could into the gearbox, decided that that was roughly 1.75 litres, and got Esther back on the ground. Following some advice from Stuart, I decided to put some heat protection on the clutch line before screwing it into the slave cylinder. Then I topped up the clutch reservoir, gave the clutch a bleed with my one-way valve pipe. Then it was time to hook up the battery and fit the shifter before testing to see if the clutch actually worked. Which it didn't. Oh dear. Alright, there seems to be an issue with the clutch where I basically haven't got enough throw on it. I'm not able to change gear. I was able to turn the engine off, then put it in gear, and yeah, essentially as soon as you drop the handbrake, even though your foot is still down on the clutch, it wants to roll forward and I can smell the clutch burning. So I'm hoping I can adjust this out with my pedal stop on the clutch pedal. One thing to note though, I don't want to do it now because my exhaust is hot, but I do have free play on the clutch arm, whereas an issue that some people have with these Mazda conversions is that you don't have enough free play on the clutch arm. So I can only assume that this friction plate that I've got now requires more throw on the clutch to make it you know, work. Yeah, I hope I haven't put the friction plate in around the wrong way or anything like that. I don't think so. So yeah, what I'm going to do now, look at the state of that chair. Oh my God. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is adjust this pedal stop so that this will go further down to the floor, basically. I mean, it does feel like it just needs to go further, you know. It feels normal, but it feels like it doesn't quite get, you know, beyond that biting point. So yeah, let's just hope that adjusting this can solve the issue. I think if I just take the rubber bit off the back, that in itself should give me quite a lot more throw, so we can at least test the theory. Gotta be honest, it don't feel good. No different. I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's still not solved. Alright, so I decided to have another go at bleeding it, and there's definitely no air left in the system, no air bubbles at all. Now, I did kind of suspect that maybe there was something wrong with this slave cylinder. I don't think it would cause the issue with the centre spline on the clutches wearing. Maybe it could cause the issue with the crack in the old friction plate, like if you're changing gear essentially without disengaging the clutch every time. I don't know, but yeah, I'm kind of hoping that I've just got a dodgy slave cylinder now, rather than me having the friction plate the wrong way round on the clutch. So before I start tearing this apart and taking the gearbox out again, which is an absolute mission, my beautiful girlfriend Kat is coming round, and I'm going to get her to press the clutch pedal, and then I can have a look on the clutch arm on the side of the bell housing to see if it is moving as it should. You know, I can get her to sort of hold the clutch down, and then me see if I've got free play on the arm, because you know, you shouldn't have any free play on the arm when there's pressure on the clutch pedal, right? So, you know, if there's still free play when she pushes the clutch, then I reckon it's like a hydraulic issue. I have already removed the heat-proof sleeve just to check that this wasn't kinked or anything, but it's absolutely fine. I've checked that it's not kinked anywhere. You know, I can get under here and move it. So, yeah, it's not a kink in the line. But yeah, I'll check back in with you guys when Kat gets here, and we'll see exactly what's going on with the slave cylinder. Hello, my dear.
Hello.
This is a record even for me. This clutch is broken and it's done 0 miles.
No comment.
All right, I'll get you to pump the clutch and we'll see what's going on. All right, and hold it down.
Hold on.
All right, so I can now see that the slave cylinder is actually moving the clutch arm, and it looks like it's moving it, you know, the right amount. And when Kat holds her foot all the way down, there's no free play on the clutch arm. So that would tell me that potentially the slave cylinder is working all right. And the only thing I can think of now is that I've got the friction plate for the clutch the wrong way around. So I think I'm going to dive into accessing the clutch again, which is going to be a bit of a mission. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to do it without completely taking everything apart. I should be able to do it, you know, by pulling the gearbox away, but not lowering it all the way down to the ground. Yeah, and I should be able to get in there and, you know, switch the clutch around. But I'm not going to film it. I'm going to run out of daylight. I want to try and get this done before I do run out of daylight. So I'll just show you what I find when I get access to the clutch. Yeah, it was on the right way, man.
Oh, fine.
It was on the right way the whole time. All right, well, the clutch was indeed the correct way round. So that's not what's going on. And in terms of the gearbox, the clutch arm is clipped onto the ball pivot underneath this raised bit here. So it's not that. Yeah, it all looks fine. But, you know, it seemed like there just wasn't enough throw on this arm. You know, when the slave cylinder engages, when you press your clutch pedal, it pushes the arm. The arm goes like that, which then pushes the bearing into the clutch to disengage the clutch. But it's almost as if, you know, there wasn't enough throw. You know, it's almost as if the clutch pack isn't thick enough. You know, either the slave isn't moving the arm enough, or the clutch pack is too thin, so that even though the arm is moving right, this isn't pushing against the clutch enough. And part of me thinks that I should try and space the ball underneath this, which is what some people have to do. But seeing as I'm using the same clutch cover as I did before, you know, there's no difference. Like, the clutch thickness will be the same. And in fact, some people, when they're using a Pinto clutch like I am, have to actually shave a bit off of that ball to, you know, have more room in the bell housing, you know, when you don't have any free play, when you've got like too much throw essentially. And I've got the opposite of that. But as I say, it doesn't make any sense because I'm using the same clutch cover as before. So the thickness of this will be the same, right? Because the clutch cover is the same. You know, this will be roughly the same thickness as the paddle clutch that I was using before. You know, that won't be any narrower. And it's, you know, basically this and the cover that's in there. I've actually got another cover in my garage, but that's a thinner one. So that's not going to solve my issue either. So at this point, I'm just wondering and hoping in a way that it is the slave cylinder. You know, maybe the slave cylinder is, you know, faulty and it's not bleeding up enough, which means it's not pushing the arm enough, which means the clutch isn't engaging. And maybe that's why, you know, even when it's bled up, there's no, you know, loads of free play. There's loads of free play. It's weird because in the past, I'm pretty sure I've only had free play before I bled the slave up. Yeah, when I used this gearbox, I'm sure that was the case. And then when I put the other gearbox in, for some reason, I had free play, which then made me not want to modify the ball like some people have to. So I don't know. I really don't know. But this was the right way around, so that isn't the issue. Anyway, I'm going to run out of daylight, so I need to put the car back together somewhat at least. And yeah, maybe take the slave off and have a look, see if I can see anything obvious wrong with it. Hello, so it's now 2 days after the big meet at Southend that I was trying to get Esther ready for. And unfortunately, she didn't make it, and neither did I. I was trying desperately right up until, well, even on the Friday, just trying to suss out what's going on with Esther's clutch. And yeah, I failed basically, and I didn't even go to the meet myself because I was basically working through the whole of Friday. Now, the last clip that you've seen on this video was Wednesday, and on Thursday I managed to get another slave cylinder off the shelf from Euros. I had to do like a click and collect thing and collect it at 3 p.m. So by the time I picked that up and got round to the garage, you know, most of the day had already gone, and I still had to pick my beautiful girlfriend Kat up from work that evening because I had her car, of course. And when I fitted the new slave cylinder, there was no difference at all. You know, the car just wouldn't go into gear. So then I was scratching my head and I was thinking, you know, the only thing I had left to try was to try my other clutch cover, which in my mind isn't going to solve the issue because it's actually thinner, right? So if anything, that's going to require more throw on the clutch, not less. But it was, you know, the last thing that I had to try, you know, just a last ditch attempt, just, you know, something else to rule out before I threw the towel in completely. So on Thursday evening, I started taking the car apart. You know, I didn't have time to dive into swapping it then if I was going to pick it up on time and if I was going to, you know, get the car away before it got dark. So I started taking the car apart, you know, took the prop shaft off, took half of the bell housing bolts out, took the starter motor off, etc. So that I was ready then to go round to the garage on Friday to, you know, have this last ditch attempt at getting the car on the road. Now, I ended up putting a message out in the group chat for the meet, and Kev saw it. Kev is the one with the yellow rear-wheel drive Cosy powered Mark 1 Fiesta. He also owns the Olympic blue Mark 1 Escort, and he very kindly got in touch. He's always super helpful with everyone's projects. But yeah, he got in touch and he kind of confirmed what I was thinking in terms of the other clutch cover not gonna solve my issue. I was actually on the way to the garage when he called, so you know, he saved me going through all that hassle, you know, for no reason. And then he suggested something that I hadn't thought of, and what he suggested was that I get Kat to push the clutch, and then while she's holding the clutch pedal down, I then get a screwdriver and try and hold the clutch arm down, like manually, and then while I'm doing that, get Kat to pump the clutch a few times. So in theory, you're going to fill the slave cylinder up with fluid and kind of adjust the length of it, or adjust the throw on the slave cylinder, if you like. And we tried that, and it seemed to work, and I was all happy, and I sent Kev a message saying you're a genius, and even put on the group chat for the meet. Like, I was like really happy that, you know, Esther was going to be able to go to the meet. I still had to, you know, put the car back together and clean her and stuff, so it's still going to be tight, but I was really happy. But what I didn't realise was, when I tested the clutch thinking that I'd solved it, I didn't have the prop shaft hooked up. So obviously, you know, the car went into gear in the same way that it will go into gear when the wheels are off the ground, you know, even when the fault was there, right? Because, you know, the clutch is working, it's just not working enough. So when you've got the resistance of the wheels on the ground, you know, when you've got the engine running, it won't go into gear. But when the wheels are off the ground, you know, there's no resistance there, so it will go into gear. It's just that when your foot's down on the clutch, the wheels will still be spinning, right? So, you know, it was a premature celebration. I didn't actually even get back to Kev or you know, correct myself in the group chat or anything. I just didn't turn up to the meet that night. But what I did find when I got the car back, you know, when I put the prop shaft back on the car and, you know, there was resistance there, is that the gearbox now would go into gear, but it was exactly how it was when I took Esther apart. You know, you'd have to sort of crunch it into gear. Like, it will go into gear, but it's clunky, you know, it's not smooth, right? So what Kev suggested definitely improved things ever so slightly. And then I was in a position where, you know, I'd run out of things to try, basically. I was forgetting what I sort of thought of before, which I mentioned earlier in this video, about the pivot ball, because some people have to space that out or some people have to shave it back. But yeah, the only thing that I sort of, in that moment, thought that I could try, because it was something that Kev also suggested. He said about lengthening the rod on the slave cylinder. He said sort of like put a blob of weld on the end of it, you know, and grind it down. Obviously, I'm not in a position to do that around the garage. My welder is here at home and I don't have power at the garage. My generator won't run a welder. So, you know, I wasn't able to, you know, lengthen the rod. But then I thought to myself, maybe I could stack some washers on the rod, you know, the clutch arm end of the rod, and see if that improves things. And I stacked as many washers as I could on there, so that it could still locate in the hole on the clutch arm, and that didn't solve the issue either. And then I sort of come to the conclusion that I weren't going to the Southend meet. You know, I did always plan to go even if I didn't have my car. I was going to go in Kat's car, but, you know, at that moment I decided, right, that's it, I'm not going. You know, started getting the ump a bit, if I'm honest. And then I just decided that I was going to tear Esther apart again and look at spacing the pivot ball for the clutch arm, and that's what I did. I stacked as many washers I could get on there. I think it was like 4 washers, and then, you know, before I'd even got the gearbox back onto the engine, there was no play on the clutch arm, so obviously it was, you know, spaced too much, right? So then I took a washer off and then tried it again. It still wouldn't go right up to the engine without there being any free play, so I took a washer off and I kept going until I basically got to the point where there was only 1 washer on the clutch ball, so I'm literally spacing it by 1 washer. Then I put the car back together, you know, semi-fully, not completely fully, just enough for me to test it. And yeah, it was still the same. It was going into gear, but it was very clunky. So then I sort of added a washer again. And then, you know, there weren't free play on the clutch arm, you know, just like there was when I tried the 2 washers before. But, you know, I still just decided to semi-put it back together and just see how the shifter felt. And it was still clunky. So then I decided to put like 2 washers and a fin washer on, and then I put it back together, tested it, and it felt like there was a slight little bit of clunk when I was changing gear. And by now, you know, I've taken the car apart, put it back together so many times, it's getting really late. Like, I've already called Kat round to the garage to pick me up, because obviously Maude's out of action, there's no way of me getting home. So at that point I decided to call it a day. Now, by that point, her battery was flat, right? So when I'm testing it, I'm literally turning the engine over on the starter motor and then just trying the clutch. All right, so I should probably explain this a bit better. At first, she ran out of fuel where I was trying her so many times, and then I started testing her, you know, by just turning the engine over on the starter motor, and then eventually the battery went too flat for me to even do that. And, you know, it's just feeling a little bit clunky, but nowhere near as bad as it did earlier on in the day, you know, with less washers. Now, I don't know until I get back around there with a fully charged battery to test it properly how the clutch is or isn't going to work, right? The problem is, if you stack too many washers, or if you know, create too much throw on the clutch, you know, if you have it all too tight in there, then the clutch might slip when you're driving normally. You know, if you haven't got enough throw, it won't disengage the clutch, which is the issue I was having. But if you have it too tight in there, the clutch will slip. So I don't know where I'm at in terms of, how the clutch is going to work. I'm hoping that I go around there with a full battery, the gears are going to shift, without too much clunking. No clunking would be great. Maybe what I was feeling was just because I'm turning the engine over on the starter motor, so it's your engine's running like round instead of running like smoothly. So hopefully what I was feeling when I was testing it, isn't what I think it is, and hopefully the gears will work smoothly, and hopefully the clutch won't slip. Hopefully it's not all too tight in there to cause the clutch to slip, but I won't know until I go back around there. So yeah, an absolute mission. Like, how many times have I changed clutches on my cars? Like, clutches just seem to wear out far too quickly. I've done clutch jobs so many times. I'm so glad that I've made Esther's large tunnel bigger, because what I've been struggling with over the last few days would have been an even bigger mission if I had to lower the cross member down every time to get the box off. So I'm grateful that taking the gearbox off of Esther is a lot easier now. But yeah, what an absolute mission. I mean, what's going on is that the friction plate probably isn't very compatible with the cover that I'm using. You could say, yeah, maybe I should have bought the whole clutch from that company, and you're probably right. Maybe once it didn't work, I should have just sent that clutch back or just bought another one. But when you're in the moment and you're trying to get a car ready for an event, you just want to make it work, don't you? And I'm a bit stubborn, and I'm a bit too willing to keep trying, you could say. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I think I may have solved the issue, but I'm not actually sure. And yeah, I'm pretty gutted that I didn't make it to the Southend meet. I can see all over the internet that it was awesome. I really hope that they arrange another meet like that, and hopefully I can actually make it to the next one. But that's where I'm at with Esther. Now, next time I go around to the garage, probably tomorrow, that'll be in the next video, I will hook up the battery and finally confirm, how well or not the clutch is working. I've also picked up a used exhaust for Maude today. I was going to weld, her one that broke the other day, and I probably still will, and keep that as a spare, because I've got a welder here at home. I can do that here in the garden. But this one came up on eBay. It is a bit rusty. I had to pay 90 quid for it, for a full system, the centre bit and the back box. But it's a 2-inch system that's got a sleeve on the front of it to mate to a 2¼ inch manifold. So it should go straight on, because, I've got a 2¼ inch manifold, and, I've got a 2-inch system on there. It's just, that it's sort of bodged to work, whereas this one I've bought has got a bit welded onto it. So hopefully that'll be a really quick fix to get Maude back on the road, and hopefully, hopefully when I hook up Esther's battery, she'll be back on the road. But yeah, what an absolute fail. I want to thank everyone who has watched this video to the end. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs up anyway, because I've had so much grief. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out my website for merchandise and car parts. Massive thanks, as always, to my patrons for your ongoing support. I'll leave all the links to everything in the description, along with my email address for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.